It's always just between us, all right?
Welcome into Between Us at 938 Live. I'm Angela Liv, and as always, we're discussing relationship issues that matter to you and hopefully giving you some very good tips and some solutions to any problems that you might have in this regard. Now, in every relationship and marriage, ups and downs are quite inevitable, but when the downs get too overwhelming, we might find ourselves weighing our options and having to make the decision whether or not to stay or to leave that relationship. Now, one of the most painful decisions that anyone could make. And we're going to help you navigate that in just a bit as well with my guest today, counselor and relationship coach at Adora Asia Coaching, Ang Thiam Hong, here to take your questions on how to make that very important life decision. Thiam Hong, so great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me back again.
A very pertinent topic. I mean, you come across this all the time when your clients come to you. Should I stay or should I leave my marriage? What are the concerns that usually come along with this? What prompts them to want to leave in the first place?
Well, to begin with, we must understand that no one marries to divorce. And they will try their best to stay in the marriage and try to work it out. This is on paper, and it's not wrong. However, in practice, you find that it's not that easy to make that decision to stay or to go. So that's why they sometimes seek the help of a counselor to help them think through. And you know, counselors don't give advice.
Right.
They help you think through by asking questions, offer perspectives, make challenge your unhelpful thinking, and so forth. All right, so that you can make better decisions. But they center around a few core factors, that they may want to take into consideration. So normally, I would start by asking them, what is their, if they have one concern only, what would that be? Just to get it going, this is just to help them prioritize, and then they will just start their conversation, and they bring out the first factor that matter to them, and then we talk about it. All right, and then guide them through. The idea is at the end of the session, it's not necessary for them to leave the session and say, I have decided. No. Go back and think about it. After a while, they can make better in a decision. That's why they go and see a counselor in the first place.
I mean, it's great that you're clarifying this, Thiam Hong, because sometimes, we have these misconceptions about, okay, we go for the solution, but sometimes these solutions take a long time to get to, just because we need to introspect, we need to figure out what's really going on with the feelings. So do you spot a pattern when, people come to you, and usually, what are these, when you ask them, what's the biggest problem that's bugging you right now? Are there common patterns that start to emerge?
Oh, yes. The first thing is usually if they have children, I think listeners will not be surprised to hear this. If they have children, and they will say, well, children, the negative effects of divorce on children is well publicized, and then, what about that? You see? So they want to talk about it, and it is understandable, it's correct. Definitely divorce has effect on children, but when the couple or when the client comes forward, they are already struggling because, let's face it, most probably they already don't want to stay. But they are struggling with that decision. So we help them. They sometimes no longer love their spouse. They really want to go. But like you say, one of the common factors is children. And they say, now what am I going to do about that? So in counseling, then we help them check out their values, what's important to them, For example, children is number one in my life, by hook or by crook. They are better off with a balance of mom and dad, and therefore I will have to stay, even though I am in this very, 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 very unhappy relationship. We help them, we talk about it. For example, just as an example, but this is not to encourage divorce.
No,
if you're
not
concerned
at all,
about the negative effects on children, we acknowledge that, But we say, what about the other side? For example, have you thought that children need two things, basically for their self-esteem and their stable emotional development? Number one, they need to know that they matter to the family. Number two, they need to know that their parents are okay. So if they have these two needs met, whether you're together or separate, right, it still helps them. So what this says is, look, if you really go separate ways, and both of you commit to parenting, you meet that needs. Is it all that bad? We try to help them balance it so that they don't see it in just, they don't feel so trapped when they see it in a black or white way.
Right, in no way are we sort of, advocating for either side. I mean, each case is very different. There are always many reasons why people hit that point where they're deciding to stay or go. But really it's about, illuminating all the options available, and then based on what they are prioritizing in their life, that decision can be come to eventually. And when you talk about, one reason that people come to you would be that they don't feel in love in their marriage anymore. Children is a very big reason about why they can't seem to decide. Are there other reasons that people turn to you?
Well, all these reasons and factors, they are actually related. They don't really stand on their own. So, for example, you can have very specific kind of reason. Maybe I give you a very simple example. So, this a man in the late 50s really don't want the marriage anymore. 2 adult children, lovely. He doesn't despise his wife. It's just that he's no longer in love with the wife after so many years, But to him, his values are very important. So what do I mean by values here? Well, this is where I check it out with him during counseling. What is important to you down the road? He said, well, I'm in my so-called last phase of my life. It's very important to me that I am happy. Now, that is his value. So I said, that's understandable. So does the 26 years of marriage mean nothing to you? He said, that means something. But you ask me about my values. I want to be happy. That is his dominant reason. We don't tell them right or wrong. We just check, make sure that they know what they are saying, And then, based on that, they will go back, think about it, and that will be one of the factors. They will think about it. Is it really my value? Is it so important to me that I can throw away 26 years of the marriage? In the end, they made a decision. In this case, he decided to go, which is quite surprising, but he decided to go.
It does seem that in the end, the decision has to come from you, individually. There's nothing that any external party should be pressuring you into doing. But once you weigh all that out with, some professional help or even with your own reflection, that would help.
I would like to say something about that. Sure, in the end, you make your own decision, ideally that would be the case. But in practice, sometimes you can be influenced by the company you're in.
Right, so we're going to talk a bit about that as well, how we can bring all these things in. Of course, never is a decision made in isolation. You also have to consider the feelings of others. In this case, the spouse, probably the children as well, maybe other members of the family. So we're going to find out a bit more about how you can make that decision if you get to a point in your relationship or marriage where you're deciding whether you should stay or leave. If you have questions, feel free to call in. We really want to lend you a listening ear as well. Adora Asia coach Ang Thiam Hong here to take your questions and also give you some tips and advice. Stay tuned.
Reset your relationships in Between Us.
Thanks for staying tuned to Between Us and 938 Live. Today, chatting with my guest counselor and relationship coach at Adora Asia Coaching, Ang Thiam Hong. Today, we're talking all about how to make that decision whether to stay or leave in a marriage. We've already talked about, the reasons perhaps why people reach that point, Thiam Hong. You also brought up the idea that you never make that decision alone. You always take other people's ideas and other people's feelings into consideration. How does that pan out?
Well, apart from friends and people I meet outside, I also hear this in counseling. Influence, your friends. A very obvious example is if you ask for advice from close friends, 2 or 3 who are A, not married, 2, divorced, what kind of response do you expect to get? Usually they will say, I don't want to influence your decision, but they do influence.
So
and
who
parents,
you talk to is pretty important, isn't it?
Very important. So it's that's why sometimes they decide to go and see a counselor, because they believe that they are the third party. They are not invested in your life. They are just there to help you, offer you a service, and they like to hear someone in the middle, because if they hear from a friend and they themselves know that they can be biased views, they know, they just want a different perspective, and it's quite surprising. Sometimes after speaking with a counselor, you can be clearer about your situation.
The instinct is always, to either tell your friends or the closest members of your family, because that's where you seek support. I mean, when you're emotionally feeling very vulnerable, for example, if someone's just cheated on you and you need to talk to someone, I mean, that's fine to get that comfort. But the answers to your question should really come from a place that, is within you and not so much from other people.
Yes, and sometimes to be able to make that decision, it does, like we said just now, depend on the outside too. But if you speak to a counselor, usually they help you make that decision, and that's what you mean just now when you say it comes from within. In the end, you will have to take responsibility for your decision. You no longer blame anyone or any circumstances for your experience of life after you have made your decision. You made that decision, you take the responsibility after speaking to somebody.
As a third party as well, sometimes when your friends come to you with that sort of, problem, or a family member comes to you with that problem, sometimes it's hard for you to weigh in as well because you feel that, it shouldn't be your place to give advice. What would you say to those people who are receiving this sort of questions?
Well, firstly, they have to give themselves a pat on the back because obviously you're trusted by this person,
yes.
Before they come and see you. That's good. All right. Number two, I would like to invite them to be aware of what they are doing, what's happening. The reason is, once they are aware, they can moderate their response. If they are not aware, they will not be able to moderate their response as they should. And then they would tend to guide the friend in a slightly different direction.
So we're looking at
aware.
Right, we're looking at a few things here. One is how to support, someone who's going through that, how to kind of guide the person in a way that allows them to bring out their own responses, their own decisions. Also a little bit more about, when there are children involved, maybe the other factors involved, like your values, things that tend to complicate a lot of matters with regard to leaving or staying in a marriage. If you want to ask any questions or share your problems with us, 66911 at 938. My guest today is counselor and relationship coach at Adora Asia Coaching, Ang Thiam Hong. He's going to take your questions as well and give us more updates on what we can do about this. Stay tuned.
Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live. It's always just between us, all right?
Thanks for staying tuned to Between Us at 938 Live. I'm Angela Lim, chatting with my guest today, who is counselor and relationship coach at Adora Asia Coaching, Ang Thiam Hong. We're talking today about when the ups and downs of marriage get overwhelming, the downs get too much, we might find ourselves weighing our options whether or not to stay or leave that marriage, helping you kind of demystify how to make that decision right now here with Thiam Hong. Thiam, tell us a bit about some of the factors that tend to lead to either decision. It could be, children will definitely be a big one. Tell us a bit about some of your experiences.
Well, children, we have already spoken a little bit earlier on. My client would normally be very concerned on the effect on the children, but sometimes I offer them a different perspective, which I touched on briefly. That, for example, you have good parenting after that, things are not that bad. And there are sometimes surprisingly positive things. I give you specific example. We hear about absent fathers, those who are physically or emotionally absent. These absent fathers, they spend very little time with their children. But after divorce, they might be claiming for excess.
Right.
So excess time become very precious, which means they'll probably spend more time with their children. And we know children need time. Not just quality time, They really need time. They need to know that they matter to the father too, or the mother. So make time for them. Spend time with them. Whatever you do, show them that you love them. And if the parents both can fulfill this, well, then it's easier for them to make the decision if they are definitely thinking not to stay. Or if they are held back because of this. But again, I have, at the risk of repeating myself, I'm not encouraging divorce. What I'm saying is, you have to consider the other side of the picture. It's not always negative.
Right. It's not that there's a dead end either way, that there's always options. I mean, especially in the case of maybe you talk about abuse where, it's really bad, the person can't change, then, the husband or the wife might have to get out of that situation. It's not the end. There are options available.
There are options. I give you an example. The finance. You mentioned about abuse. Because I work with family violence people. Sometimes they can't leave the marriage. Reason? Finance. They are not working, full-time housewife. So, when you talk about the power balance in a relationship, there's an imbalance. The husband is way up there. And they're in control. Right? Now, they are down, say in an abusive relationship, they want out. So one factor that they may take into consideration is finance. Then they say, no, I can't move at all. Maybe it's true. But when they come for counseling, sometimes we offer them some information. For example, have you heard of the Women's Charter? Do you know you're entitled to maintenance and your children too? How much? Don't ask me, but you are entitled to that. What about the house? I don't even contribute a single cent. I said, do you know after, I think, May 1997, Women's Charter, even though you don't contribute a cent to the house, but because you're married, you contribute in other ways, you're still entitled to some. How much, I don't know. Do you know this? Why don't you go and speak with your a lawyer, just for legal counseling, and you can have it free. If you're having difficulty, just to seek the counseling so that you can be more empowered and so that you can make better decisions.
Again, I mean, speaking of empowerment, the fact that you're even bringing up all these options, these other solutions that can come up, it really empowers the person who's making that decision, because I'm not bounded by one choice now, which is usually where they get really, really stressed out. And emotionally, it takes its toll. Speaking of which, there's also the idea that especially when older couples don't get along anymore, they fear loneliness. So I don't want to be alone when I'm in my old age, and that's why I don't leave my partner even though I'm miserable. What do you usually say to that?
That is for elderly couple, that's understandable, you see. But let's talk about the maybe those in the 30s, 40s. Some of them fear loneliness. This is what I hear. I'm afraid of being lonely. Again, when they come for counseling, we don't dispute that. We sometimes fear loneliness too, but again, we offer a different perspective. For example, you said you fear loneliness. Are you lonely now? Have you been lonely in your marriage for all these years? We say, no, by definition, I have my spouse, I can't be lonely. But I say, have you heard of the term couple loneliness? Living together and yet feeling lonely? Oh, I'm like that.
Right.
How different is that from you being alone?
Yeah.
So we ask them questions and ask them to think about it. Then they realize actually they have been lonely already. It's just that they don't see it this way.
Yeah.
And they already can cope with their loneliness. We tell them, have you been coping with it? How have you been coping it? This is what I've been doing. Well, you're still here, aren't you?
Right.
You're surviving, so you have coped with loneliness.
Interesting.
So they challenge their thinking, so
right.
Empower them.
There's so many ways of looking at an issue. I mean, sometimes it's hard to look at it on your own when you're very emotionally, entangled in it. Sometimes you're just stressed out, you're worried about money, you're worried about kids. It really helps to have someone to be able to kind of shine a light on certain areas that you're not looking at as well. Let's talk a little bit about that single most important factor. Thiam Hong's going to tell us what that is in just a bit, in determining whether or not the person will stay or go, or whether your marriage will work out or not. We're going to hear what that single most important factor is in just a bit. Today we're talking all about staying or leaving a marriage, how to make that decision well. My guest today is counselor and relationship coach, Adora Asia Coaching relationship coach as well, Ang Thiam Hong. Stay tuned.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live.
Chatting today with my guest, counselor and relationship coach at Adora Asia Coaching, Ang Thiam Hong, here taking our questions a little bit more about how to make that decision whether to stay or leave a marriage. Now, Thiam Hong, there's one very important factor in all your years of counselling couples, talking to couples, that you've noticed makes all the difference between whether or not a marriage will stay intact and whether or not the couple tends to leave. What is that one single factor?
Well, it's not really one single most important factor, but it is a very important factor that can sway their decision whether to work on the marriage or not. You see, they come to me, sometimes they are not ready to repair their relationship. They come to me, sometimes just to make decisions like that. I usually say, you come here to decide whether to turn left or to turn right. You're not really ready to work on your relationship. Let's call that part 2. You see? So they come for this. So we talk about this kind of situations. And I noticed that one of the most very important factor that they will consider, is whether they see hope in their relationship. Whether they see hope. And remember, whether they see hope in the relationship depends a lot on their mood. When we are down, we tend to be negative. And when they come and see me, usually already they're in that negative mood. Usually not that hopeful. No, I've known her for 15 years. She will change? Really? I don't think so. Things like that, you see. So sometimes I do ask them, do you see hope? Sometimes they say, I don't know. But sometimes there's another way of saying no. They don't see any hope. So I will sometimes offer them something like this. I say, do you know that studies have shown, that the probability, of repairing a marriage is better, if it has been strong in the earlier years. Actually, you don't need research to tell us that. It's quite obvious. How has your relationship been in the last 10 to 15 years? Oh, it's good, it's all right. Until 2 years ago, I said, so there you are. There you are. Something for you to think about. So you still think there's no hope? Right?
I mean, in some cases, when you do talk to them, Thiam Hong, there are people who really have lost hope, and in that case, it makes it really quite difficult to come to a consensus on staying in the marriage. But in almost every other case, when the persons involved are willing to work on it, it usually results in quite a good outcome, doesn't it?
If they both are willing and motivated to work for whatever reasons, then I think the chances of a good outcome is obviously greater. So, for example, on this topic of hope again, sometimes they really don't see hope. Then sometimes we tell them that, hey, have you heard about the 4 phases in marriage, which we all know? Honeymoon, disillusionment, conflict, and the reconciliation phase. That means if you survive that 3rd phase, conflict phase, which is why both of you are here, you have that nice phase at the end called reconciliation phase. Now, that's the long-term view of the marriage. So, since that's usually the last reconciliation phase, do you see that as hope? I see that as hope. But you have to work through if you survive this conflict phase. So if both of you are motivated to work through this, do you still see hope? Again, they start, begin to see hope long term, because people tend to usually want to grow old with each other couple.
It's that romantic idea.
No, yes, this is you ask any couple that survive conflict, in the 60, 70 years old, you will notice that they have gone through these 4 phases in marriage. It's just they vary in the length, the depth of the conflicts, things like that. In the end, they come back to the last phase. If they survive the conflict phase, this is critical. So if you see that, just like the light at the end of the tunnel, you see hope. All right, you see light at the end of the tunnel, but you see that in cartoons, you see the winding road leading to the end of it. You don't just see hope; you see realistic hope.
Right.
Is there a path in this? Yes. I offer you the 4 phases in a marriage. Do you see hope? Maybe you want to think about it. So let them go. So maybe they may be motivated, then they may see hope.
I mean, whether or not, you're tuning in now and you're, trapped in sort of a conflict-ridden relationship, or you're feeling like you don't really know what to do about the situation, as Thiam Hong was saying as well, if you do see hope, you and your partner do see hope, there are always ways to work around a lot of conflicts. But if you don't see hope as well, you might want to challenge that assumption, because, a lot of times when we're emotional, we don't really perceive all our options very well. Either way, if you feel like you need some external help, you can go to this website. It's Thiam Hong's Adore Asia Coaching if you need to get some help as well with counseling, and we're talking out a lot of your decision-making processes. www.familycounseling.com.sg. That's counseling with a double L. www.familycounseling.com.sg with a double L.
No com. Just
All right, so .sg. All right, thanks for correcting that. Once again, www.familycounseling with the double L .sg. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Thiam Hong, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Between Us at 938 Live. I'm Angela Lim. Thanks for tuning in.
Man is a knot into which relationships are tied, but nothing comes between us. On 938 Live.